And action. Take 3. Of course, as you can see, I'm filming this for our YouTube channel. So if anybody missed it tonight, please have them go to the Chaucer's Books YouTube channel. It should be up shortly later on this evening, as soon as I can get to a computer. Tonight's subject is an amazing book that you've all heard. We've heard a bit of sampling from The Great Escape and a few other movies. I think we played The Ten Commandments. Elmer Bernstein, film composer. It's an authorized biography, by the way. Elmer, of course, has scored over 100 films, including The Ten Commandments, Magnificent Seven, Thoroughly Modern Millie, which he won an Academy Award for, and one of my all-time favorites, as I announced, The Great Escape. He's also been a huge part of my childhood in movies like The Blues Brothers, Airplane, Stripes, Animal House, and Ghostbusters, which we'll talk a little bit more about. He's worked with DeMille, he's worked with Scorsese, George Roy Hill, amazing, amazing directors that he has enhanced those movies, which rewarded him with 14 Oscar nominations. And once a decade, from the decade of the 1950s all the way through 2000, he's at least garnered 1 nomination for an Oscar. In addition, he's been nominated for 3 Tonys and 5 Grammys. So very, very pleased to bring out not only his son, but an accomplished composer and conductor in his own right, Peter Bernstein. Peter Bernstein, he's an accomplished composer and conductor. He's composed scores for over 500 feature films, miniseries, long-form television, and episode. His first breakthrough came through the Ewok adventure for Lucasfilms in 1985, and its sequel, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, in 1986. Soon after came his first TV series, one of the best series of the 1980s and 90s, 21 Jump Street, with an unknown actor starring by the name of Johnny Depp. His orchestra credits include Animal House, Trading Places, and the aforementioned Ghostbusters, which he worked with his father on. He's also scored the most iconic music video in rock history in Michael Jackson's Thriller. So we're so pleased to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So this book, I got to ask you though, first, your childhood, what was that like?
Well, it felt normal at the time.
Yeah. Like, was your father walking around with a wand in his hand?
No. I heard a lot of piano. I heard him playing. I got used to going to sleep late at night with him playing down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
And once in a while, he might, in the morning say, hey, listen to what I wrote. And he played the theme from something. But it was all it all felt normal. I mean, it wasn't, I should say I went to school with the children of other Hollywood composers in a small private school, so they were all doing the same thing. Somebody's father or mother was nominated for an Academy Award every year.
Wow.
And that was the way life was in those days.
Was there a lot of peer pressure? I mean, amongst
No.
No.
It was something our parents did.
But you actually ended up doing that, and I want to know how that came about. Was this through osmosis, or was this through?
No, hardly. No, when I started music, I got as far away from him as I possibly could. I was a bass player in rock and roll bands for 20 years.
Wow.
And produced records and did whatever else in that world.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was musically curious.
Mm-hmm.
So at one point, about halfway through my career in rock and roll, I went to him and said, I want to learn how to orchestrate music as it is in your world.
Mm-hmm.
I was studying it academically, but it's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, okay, fine, pick something and orchestrate it, and I'll have a look,
Mm-hmm.
which I did. And I guess he liked it well enough. I started doing little things for him on his films. He would find something that I could handle.
Mm-hmm.
And it just went on from there until I was doing entire films and kind of morphed into a composer somewhere.
I think it's really neat that he did the Blues Brothers, and then you scored the Blues Brothers 2000,
Oh, yeah,
correct?
yeah, I did.
It's kind of like a little full circle moment for you. Working with your father, did you feel like you deferred, or was it a pure collaboration as far as
Well,
how you
there were
guys-
different versions of it. When I was
Yeah.
orchestrating for him, arranging music for him,
Mhm.
I deferred because that's that position.
Mhm.
You know, I did what I did, and I showed it to him, and if he liked it, great. If he didn't, I redid it. It was pretty simple.
Mhm.
Later on, we shared composing credits, and when we did that, we kind of both did our own thing, and somehow it all meshed well.
Mhm.
But it was very easy. He was astonishingly self-confident.
Okay.
And that extended to whatever failings his collaborators might visit upon his projects. He just was able to fix it. He didn't worry about it.
Wow, that's amazing. And as far as this project, I have to ask you, you're so close to it, obviously. Was it difficult for you? You know, what were the challenges of putting this book together?
Mostly time,
Mhm.
really. I mean, I knew a lot. There's very little in here that I didn't have some inkling of.
Okay.
But to flesh it all out and do it with some sort of objectivity was a challenge, I suppose.
Yeah.
I was lucky in the sense that he almost never threw away a piece of paper that he had held in his hands.
Yeah.
Everything was filed. And he also left an extensive oral history, incomplete but extensive. And there were quite a lot of interviews and things that he wrote over the years. It was really about finding it all, compiling it, making sense out of it.
Did it help that you lived with him in terms of memory of certain stories, or did you have to do like more external research?
No, there are a lot of things in here that I would be the only single person on the planet who could write it. But I interviewed a lot of people, and there were a lot of stories, so it got added to a lot.
What kind of external research did you do in terms of, besides the interviews, were there documents, letters?
Well, like I said, he saved everything, every
did?
letter,
Wow.
every document, everything. So it was really sifting through it, and a lot was written about him.
How long did that take you to sift through all that?
Ooh, 15 years? Well, it took 15 years from end to end.
Yeah. You know, I couldn't imagine anyone else writing this book. I think I'm really glad that you did. When did you realize that you wanted to do this project, and how did that come about?
You know, I don't actually remember.
Really?
The idea came about somehow, somewhere, and it was a long road, and there were other people involved at various other times, but it somehow, I think I was the one that wanted it done the most. You know, from what other contributions there were, I always ended up being the person who compiled it all and made it make sense.
You had, earlier, you described yourself as not really a writer, and, well, you are now. obviously.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, but how much different as far as like compositions and creating something in words as opposed to creating something in music?
Couldn't be any more different.
And how did you go about your process in writing it?
Oh, I think it's a question I've never thought about before. On the one hand, there was my personal experience of it, and I was born in 1951, so I lived his entire career. Don't remember the very early days, but I lived it. So there was a great deal of experience there to draw upon. So I could do the research and find out what he did and sift it through my own experience of it and put it into a narrative. The narrative was already there because I
Yeah.
lived it, just adding the pieces. The earlier stuff, the stuff before 1950, whenever my memory picks up, that was a whole other exercise because that was pure research.
Okay.
And to make a story out of that was different, and actually, in some ways, a lot more fun for me.
Oh, was it?
Yes, 'cause-
Just you're discovering something you hadn't known about your father.
Only,
before.
what's the word, anecdotally.
Yes. Which brings me to my first question actually about the book is his during the Red Scare, he had a different term for himself, and he was under suspicion but never tried on that. So he said he was gray listed as opposed to blacklisted.
You can call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
He couldn't work.
Yeah.
So, you apply whatever color makes sense, but he
So,
couldn't work.
Can you tell everyone, briefly, without giving too much
Sure.
away, about what his experience was like in that situation?
Well, he was an old school, pre-war New York Red, for lack of a better term. I mean, it's not, he wasn't the person helping the agents of Soviet Russia overthrow the government. He just believed in unions and integrating baseball and radical stuff like that. And but those endeavors dovetailed with things that were and equal rights, equal rights for women even, and those things dovetailed with things that were part of the Communist Party line, and those lines got blurred an awful lot. For instance, there was an organization called, I think it was called Counterattack, which published a newsletter, and they published one called Red Channels, which was to alert people to communist influence in broadcasting. The cover depicted a microphone with a red hand reaching for it.
Yeah.
And it cited equal rights as, a material supporting equal rights as possible evidence of communist influence. So that's what was going on.
Interesting.
But yes, when he first got here, and he was nobody was paying attention to him, so it didn't matter. And then when he got a little more notice, people were paying attention to him, and suddenly, oops, maybe he's a subversive of some sort. And he, from 1953 to 1955, he could basically not work in Hollywood. His, the quote from the book from him says, it's hard to realize now what kind of fear existed. And you didn't know who your friends were or who your enemies were. And there were people, composers, a man named Saul Kaplan, composer, blacklisted, couldn't work, several others. And then there were the ones who named names and kept working, and people had their feelings about that too.
But he managed to rise above this with a little leg up by a very unlikely.
I would call it a gigantic leg up, yes.
Okay. But it's equally unlikely because of DeMille. His views, he was staunchly anti-red.
Oh, very much so. The story starts with a film called Sudden Fear, which he did in 1953, and it was sort of the first Elmer Bernstein score. It was recognizable as something different, and it got some attention, and his agent at the time organized a screening and invited the heads of the studios, heads of the music departments at the studios, to come watch the screening, which is something you would do in those days. And people paid attention and they liked it, and then literally a month and a half later he couldn't work anymore. So he supported himself in various ways. He was a rehearsal pianist for the film Oklahoma. He arranged music for a Danny Kaye film called The Court Jester, uncredited. And he did that as a favor, that last one as a favor for the assistant head of music at Paramount, who was at that screening. And the assistant head of music called him to do that Court Jester movie, and my father said, I don't want to do that, I want to compose. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, if you do this for me, the next time I have an opportunity to hire you, I will. So that opportunity came up a little while after where he called him, but I can read that one from the book,
Yeah.
which would be good.
That would be
Do that?
great. Yeah, please do.
Okay. I only bookmarked about 15 places here.
Congratulations.
And now I can't even find it.
Very
Okay.
symmetrical.
Okay, so this picks up in early 1955, and it starts with this summary. Elmer's break, when it came, was spectacular. Just as his political trouble seemed to be easing, he was publicly accused of being a communist, and then rescued from a potentially career-ending investigation by one of the leading anti-communists in Hollywood, who was also his employer. That's DeMille. In just a few months, he went from being a political outcast to the top tier of Hollywood composers, scoring the most expensive movie ever made. At the same time, he also went from being known as a composer of dramatic scores with a classical sensibility to being known as the composer of groundbreaking, hard-driving jazz scores, and back again. So, this is the assistant head of music at Paramount, a guy named Roy Fasted, calling. He said, well, Cecil B. DeMille is making a film here called The Ten Commandments. The score will be written by Victor Young eventually. DeMille needs somebody to write dances and, you know, little things like that. There might be a replacement later. You'll have to meet DeMille. I went down to the set presently, and DeMille came over to us. Roy introduced us quite formally, and DeMille looked at me and said, Mr. Bernstein, do you think you could do for ancient Egyptian music what Puccini did for Japanese music in Modern Butterfly? If that was a test, as Elmer thought, he answered correctly by saying, I don't know, but I'd like to try. He later mused that if he had answered yes to the question, he would have been out of there in about 2 minutes. He was hired on a week-to-week contract, March 8th, 1955, and suddenly found himself working for the legendary director on the most expensive movie ever made. At the time, he was 7 months behind in his rent, I should add. He was quietly dismissed and told that Mr. DeMille would like to see him on the scoring stage in a week's time. Nothing at all is known about what ancient Egyptian music sounded like beyond the depictions of the instruments they used. It was Elmer's job to invent it for the scenes with dancers and musicians. Everything was previewed for DeMille, usually accompanied by his 2 secretaries taking notes. Roy Fasted arrived early to hear the first recorded piece before DeMille and said, they're all instruments above middle C, he hates that. DeMille arrived later, listened twice, and without a word, left the room trailed by his secretaries. As he got to the door, he turned and said, that's fine. Several weeks into the assignment, Elmer did write something that displeased DeMille. He says, it was a dance or something like that. He listened to it and went ballistic. He got up out of his chair and dashed out of the room, leaving his associate producer, Henry Wilcoxon, behind. And I said to Henry, does that mean I'm fired? Is that it? So Henry said, are you kidding? He was making love to you just now compared with what he can do when he really gets mad. That same afternoon, Elmer ran into DeMille leaving the studio. Nothing was said of the incident. Instead, DeMille congratulated him upon becoming a father again. Not me, my brother. He rewrote the piece, and it was approved without further comment. The week-to-week contract stretched into months, and then he was finished. And that was, as far as he knew, all that was going to happen on the Ten Commandments. Suddenly he was working again. I think working for DeMille helped him. But meanwhile, Victor Young, the presumed composer of the Ten Commandments score, had returned to Los Angeles from New York, and his ill-fated musical Seventh Heaven, Too Ill to Work. Young told Elmer that if he could land the scoring assignment, it was fine with him, but Elmer felt he could not approach DeMille directly. Once again, it was Roy Fastad who came to the rescue. He talked to DeMille about composing the score. DeMille, apparently not content with asking if Elmer could be like Puccini, asked if he could, and this is a quote, be another Wagner. Later that same day, Fastad sent an answer in the form of an inter-office communication. It said, in part, "It is my opinion that there are few composers who could grasp the depth and feeling that you are giving to the Ten Commandments, and I feel that Bernstein, through association, would be best qualified to interpret this musically." He then goes on to name other qualified composers of the era: Dmitri Tiomkin, Victor Young, Max Steiner, and Franz Waxman, which was rare company for someone like Elmer then. Henry Wilcoxon, the associate producer and a deeply religious man, offered that Elmer had the right spiritual qualities. But when DeMille told his family he was considering hiring Bernstein, the answer came back, "Leonard?"
Very nice. This was before you, in times of your recognition of your father's work.
Right.
And I wanted to know, was there a certain film or director that was in your consciousness, something that your father worked on that you're fully aware of?
Oh, for sure. The first one was The Magnificent Seven. I remember that. I remember being at those recording sessions vividly, actually. I was little, the orchestra was big, the giant speakers in the back of the room blaring, the playbacks at us. Sure.
As a child, what was that like?
It was awesome. It was amazing. It was, everybody was very nice. I was his kid, and all the orchestra members were working for him. And at an earlier session, my mom and dad had stuck me on the podium and put a set of headphones over my head and stuck a baton in my hand and took a photo.
Oh, yeah.
So, which is in the book. No, is it? No, I don't think it is in the book.
Oh, shoot.
It's on my website. But it was a very friendly place to be there. It really was. But my real memory of that is watching my father conduct. He was very passionate conductor, a lot of energy. And for 9-year-old me to be seeing that kind of adult passion for the first time, it was very, very impressive.
That's really neat. Thanks for sharing that. 2 more questions and then we'll open it up. The one thing I also noticed is Elmer's ability to adapt with the times. Some other composers seem to have struggled with that. However, he was able to transition from the time from the 50s to the 60s, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even up to 2002, I think was his last. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how he was able to do that.
He was a smart guy. It's pretty simple. Even in his first 5 films, there was a comedy and a drama and a sports movie. It was all over the place, and his career kept up like that. The real problem was that he would get typecast from time to time. Like after he did The Man with the Golden Arm early on, everybody thought he was a jazz composer. And when he was doing the comedies, Animal House and through to Ghostbusters, everybody thought he was a comedy composer, and he hated that. So he would, when he wanted to stop doing comedies, he turned down a lot of money to do comedies.
Wow.
And he scored a film for a friend for nothing because it wasn't a comedy. So he did that multiple times in his career simply to keep things moving along.
But when he was in comedy, he was working with a director that a lot of locals are familiar with, Ivan Reitman. And I was wondering, I mean, the synergy there is very apparent. I was wondering, how he worked with Ivan and his producing partner, Joe Medjuck, couldn't.
Yikes.
Poltergeist.
Well, he met Ivan. He met Ivan when he was scoring. The story goes he was scoring a little-known, who cares, low-budget comedy at Universal, and Ivan was an associate producer. And the comedy, coincidentally, was directed by a high school friend of mine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, a high school friend of mine, and he called Universal and the music department and said, "I want Elmer Bernstein to score my extremely low-budget, stupid comedy." And Universal said, "Elmer Bernstein won't even return your call."
Oh my God.
But I mean, he knew us. He knew him as a teenager.
Okay.
Right, so he returned the call, and that movie was Animal House.
Oh my God.
So yeah, that's how that
Which
came
is a
about.
classic.
Yeah, in its own right.
Yes.
But
yes.
Ivan was a producer on Animal House, and when that was successful, Ivan immediately found a movie of his own he could direct, and called my father. And my dad in those days, he was the guy, the elder statesman. He had all the experience, a lot of knowledge, not only about musical things, but about Hollywood and navigating certain things that these, that John Landis and Ivan, who were in their early 30s at the time, needed to know.
Yeah.
And he became, one of their mentors. I'm sure there were others, but it was that kind of a relationship. As they got older and more experienced, it changed.
Yeah.
But that's how it started.
Interesting. Okay, my last question is, the other thing that, besides talent and that sets Elmer's aside was his willingness to delve into television, when a lot of composers kind of poo-poo television, but he went full force into that, and he did very well, obviously.
Yeah. Early on, his agent, I can't recall his name right now, was at what's now MCA. And MCA had a television arm called Review Studios. MCA wanted more prestige for their television, so they tried to put the people they represented as agents into the television. To me, that sounds like a giant conflict of interest, but he liked it, and he just liked being as busy as he possibly could. He would do in those days, in the late 50s, he'd be doing 30 episodes of an hour-long television show, a couple of movies, a few documentaries, concert here. I mean, it was amazing how much output he could have in those days, especially the 60s.
Well, it shows that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, since you've been so busy with all of your projects. Let's open it up for, do we have any audience questions? Feel free to make a comment or ask about a movie that he's done. Go ahead, Jolene.
Peter, are you going to do the audio? Because you have a great speaking voice.
Oh, I haven't been asked.
You should. I think you should do it. I like your
And-
voice.
Thank you.
We can have Barry compose some music, maybe.
No.
Of course,
Leave it
Barry
to
DeVore's
Peter.
on, great composer. Are there any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
What was the name of the school that you went to where everybody had an academy?
Oakwood.
That's where our son went.
Oh, really? Oakwood in the
I thought
60s was
so.
quite an experience.
Is he a composer?
No.
What year
He's
did
a
he graduate?
writer.
He's a writer.
What year did he graduate?
Oh, well, he's 51, so he graduated
Just a kid.
much later.
That's nice. Questions? Okay, I'm gonna throw out a couple directors. And if you could just give a anecdote.
Okay.
Marty Scorsese.
Oh, well, you're talking to the wrong person.
Sister.
Yeah, my sister over there was the one who orchestrated the Scorsese films. Emily.
I did, and my favorite Marty memory is that we were working on Cape Fear, and one of the very bloody scenes came up, and I was sitting next to him, and he just sort of put his hand over my eyes and said, "Don't look."
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So yeah, he was great. It was fun
That's
to
great.
work.
Did you work with Dad as well with that?
Yeah. it
So
was
how would that
orchestrating.
work? And
It was great. It was a great relationship. He gave me a lot of. He sort of made this deal with all of his orchestrators that he worked with, that I could add whatever I wanted, and he reserved the right to remove it if he didn't like it. So, yeah. So we worked together for I think about 12, 15 years.
wow,
Yeah.
that's neat. That's
Very
neat.
nice.
All right, I'm going to go back to you, Peter. John Sturgis.
His line about John Sturgis was, if you spent an hour in a room with John Sturgis telling you the story of a film, and you still didn't know what to do, you're in the wrong business. He said John Sturgis was an amazing storyteller.
How many films did they work on together?
Well, off the top of my head, The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, oh boy, Maybe the Rain Must Fall, is that John Sturgis? I'm not sure. A number of them. And those are the ones that come to mind. Oh, there was an earlier one as well, where they really didn't cross paths, but I know I'm not exactly a font of information here, but several.
Okay. My last question for you is, what do you think Elmer would think about this book? Or I should ask the sister.
I think he would probably say, why bother?
Oh, come on,
Really?
Peter. That's
Yeah,
not true.
yeah, he would, no, I just want to write some more. Don't spend time on this. He just wanted to compose and live his life. I don't think he gave much. He did, at the very end of his life, he put together an oral history where he was not asked the right questions, I might add. And because I wasn't doing it, or none of us were doing it. But he was never really the person who memorialized, what he did. He dabbled with the thought of an autobiography for a minute or two, but he liked saving his paper. I'll say that. But I don't think he was more of the moment. Whether it was a score. I'll tell you, of the moment, I always say that his two favorite scores he ever wrote was the one he just did and the one he was about to do. I think that's a pretty good summation.
Well, I think we can all agree that I think you'd be very proud of this book. It's a wonderful book.
I hope so.
So thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Well, sign some books.